Humiliation. That is the only word for it. At precisely 2:47 p.m. yesterday, in a sterile, brightly lit room in Jerusalem, the British government was publicly executed on the world stage. In front of rolling cameras and ashen-faced diplomats, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a eulogy for Britain's global reputation. His words were a dagger, plunged into the heart of our nation's honor. Britain, he said, his voice cold with a righteous contempt, has betrayed its oldest ally. The silence that followed was a vacuum, sucking the air from the room. Then, chaos erupted. But reports claim Netanyahu didn't stop there. In a move communications experts are calling a masterstroke of political warfare, he held up what were described as classified documents. Documents allegedly detailing secret, undeclared communications between Keir Starmer's government and organizations linked directly to Hamas. Papers that Labour had sworn on their political lives did not exist. Within minutes, the shockwave hit London. A diplomatic nuclear bomb had been detonated, and Britain was at ground zero, its credibility vaporized. The question is no longer if our nation has been disgraced. The question is, how did one man, Keir Starmer, a man who promised competence and stability, lead us into the most catastrophic and humiliating foreign policy collapse since the Suez Crisis? The official story, of course, is a masterclass in political cowardice and deception. They will tell you this was a simple policy adjustment, a technical measure. 11 days ago, Starmer's government quietly, almost secretively, suspended arms export licenses to Israel, citing vague humanitarian concerns. The announcement was deliberately buried. A Friday afternoon press release, the classic graveyard slot for news they pray you won't notice. They treated a seismic strategic shift, a betrayal of a key democratic ally in a time of war, like they were announcing a change to bin collection days. They thought they could get away with it. They assumed their counterparts were as weak and duplicitous as they are. But they miscalculated catastrophically. Netanyahu's response was not just swift, it was utterly devastating. He cancelled high-level visits. He expelled senior British diplomats from Tel Aviv. And then he did the unthinkable. He went public, not just with accusations, but with what sources on the ground described as cold, hard proof. The allegation is chilling, that while publicly posturing for his radical base, Starmer's government was engaged in sordid back-channel negotiations with groups that Israel, the United States, and we ourselves classify as terrorist fronts. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a blunder. Critics are calling it a deliberate, calculated appeasement of the most radical, anti-Western fringes of the Labour Party. The international fallout was immediate and brutal. The United States issued a cold, formal statement expressing deep concern about Britain's reliability as a NATO partner. That's diplomatic code for "we no longer trust you." France and Germany, our closest European neighbours, offered only a deafening, contemptuous silence. In the corridors of the Foreign Office, senior civil servants describe a state of complete and utter panic, of watching a lifetime of British diplomacy burn to the ground in a single afternoon. And it gets worse. Sources within the intelligence community are now warning of a catastrophic breach of trust within the Five Eyes network. Our closest allies, America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, are reportedly freezing Britain out of top-tier intelligence streams. They are asking themselves a terrifyingly simple question: if the British Prime Minister is willing to betray an ally based on political pressure, how can we be sure he won't betray us next? This isn't just about arms sales. It's about whether Britain can be trusted with the West's most sensitive secrets. The answer, coming back from Washington and Canberra, appears to be a resounding no. This is the price of a government that despises its own country's history and its most steadfast allies. And while the Westminster elite scramble to save their careers, who pays the real price for this unforgivable act of political vanity? You do. It has created a brutal, morally obscene two-tier Britain. At the top, you have Starmer and his cabinet, insulated in their taxpayer-funded grace and favour mansions, enjoying their six-figure salaries and chauffeur-driven cars, utterly protected from the consequences of the fire they have started. But down here, in the real world, the damage is real, and it is spreading like a cancer. Across Britain, Jewish communities are now living in a state of growing fear. Consider the story of a mother in North London. She told a local reporter, her voice trembling, how her 9-year-old son came home from school in tears, his kippah torn from his head. He asked her, "Mummy, why do they hate us?" That is the reality Keir Starmer has unleashed. Not in a war zone thousands of miles away, but on the streets of our own capital. This isn't just policy, it's permission. Permission for an ancient hatred to crawl out of the shadows, emboldened by a British government that has shown it will side with the mob over a minority community. The Community Security Trust is reporting a terrifying, almost unprecedented spike in anti-Semitic incidents since Starmer's announcement. We are talking about synagogues in London and Manchester receiving bomb threats. The Jewish Chronicle, our country's oldest Jewish newspaper, ran a front page that said it all in 2 heartbreaking words: betrayed. Again. The editorial beneath called Starmer's decision a moral catastrophe that has unleashed a poison into our society, and our own government holds the empty bottle. Then listen to the voice of Colonel David Harrison, a retired hero of the Parachute Regiment. In a video that has now been seen by millions, the 71-year-old stood, his medals for Queen and country gleaming, his voice cracking with a lifetime of loyalty and a moment of pure righteous fury. "I lost brothers fighting the same enemies Israel fights today," he said, his eyes welling. "We bled together. We died together." For Keir Starmer to spit on that shared sacrifice to appease a mob, it's a stain on our nation's honor that will never wash out. That is the voice of a man who has seen his life's work, his comrades' memory, utterly desecrated by a coward in Downing Street. The economic hammer has also fallen. The pound sterling plummeted, wiping an estimated £14 billion from the FTSE 100 in a single day. But that's just a number. What does it mean? It means your pension is worth less. It means the cost of everything you import is going up. And for some, it means total ruin. Take Mark, a 48-year-old software engineer from Cambridge. For a decade, he built a small, world-class company developing specialist medical imaging software. His biggest client? A network of hospitals in Tel Aviv. In a single email, his business was destroyed. The contracts are void. His 10 employees, skilled British workers, now face redundancy just before Christmas. His life's work, gone. Not because of a market crash, not because of a bad product, but because the Prime Minister of his own country decided his livelihood was a fair price to pay to appease the radical fringe of the Labour Party. And it gets worse. Sources inside the defence industry are leaking details of emergency board meetings. Giants like BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce, employers of tens of thousands of skilled British workers, are now reportedly threatening to move sensitive projects and investments offshore. They are asking a simple question: why would we base our most critical operations in a country whose government is so unstable, so reckless, and so hostile to our key strategic partners? This entire catastrophe flows from one man, Keir Starmer. A leader so weak, so devoid of principle, that he has allowed the most extreme, ideologically driven element of his party to hijack the foreign policy of Great Britain. He is a hollow man, a political vacuum. But the vacuum has been filled. They are a shadow cabinet of unelected ideologues. University professors who teach that Britain is an imperialist stain on history. Activist lawyers who have spent their careers trying to prosecute British soldiers. NGO bosses funded by shadowy globalist foundations who believe in open borders and the dismantling of the nation-state. For years, they were a loud but impotent fringe. Now, with a weak man in number 10, they have their hands on the levers of power. They are writing British foreign policy from seminar rooms and protest marches, and Keir Starmer is just the smiling, plausible frontman who reads their script. Insiders speak of utter chaos in number 10. Shouting matches in the cabinet room. Reports claim Foreign Secretary David Lammy threw a folder across the table, screaming that he was never properly consulted on the final decision. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, was allegedly overheard in a Westminster corridor telling a colleague this was an act of national self-harm driven by student politics. Starmer is not in control. He is a puppet, and the strings are being pulled by people who resent Britain's place in the world, who see our history not as a source of pride but of shame, and who see our allies not as partners, but as obstacles to their radical globalist agenda. But in this darkness, heroes are emerging. Not in the corrupted halls of power, but in the streets, in our towns and cities. The thousands of ordinary, decent people marching in Manchester and Leeds, waving British and Israeli flags, standing for loyalty and common sense. The veterans, like Colonel Harrison, refusing to let their sacrifice be forgotten. And it was Nigel Farage and Reform UK, wasn't it, who for years warned us this was coming? They warned that the entire political class in Westminster had become a uniparty, detached from the values and the patriotism of the British people. They were ridiculed. They were dismissed as cranks. And now,